So I do want to talk a little bit about the reconciliation situation. I know this one is something we kind of have to cover every week because it's like the big bill being negotiated right now, and it gets somewhat tiresome to constantly come back every week and basically tell you guys that more of it has been gutted and that it was inadequate to start with, and it's never good news on this shit. But we do have an interesting development. This is in the uprising. Sources: Nancy Pelosi kicked out of meeting with House Progressive Caucus amid tense budget talks. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi apparently found herself persona non grata at a meeting of the Congressional Progressive Caucus on Thursday as she attempted to persuade left-wing Democrats to sign off on bipartisan infrastructure legislation. Multiple sources confirmed to the uprising that Pelosi was kicked out of the meeting by Progressive Caucus Chairwoman Pramila Jayapal. She got kicked out and she said she was leaving anyway, a Democratic staffer who was granted anonymity to discuss the confidential meeting said of Pelosi. Spokespeople for Pelosi and Jayapal did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Of course they didn't. Pelosi was observed entering the meeting and leaving just over 10 minutes after she walked in. The speaker did not answer questions from reporters as she left. After the story was published, Pelosi's deputy chief of staff, Drew Hamill, disputed the characterization of her departure. Of course he did. So clearly she was kicked out. I don't know if you guys saw, there was a very short clip of her leaving this meeting, and she didn't say anything, but she clearly was very unhappy. Pelosi does not exactly hide how she's feeling most of the time, and this was one of those cases. She looked angry, downright angry. So I think she was kicked out. And you know what? Good on the progressives. I bitch and moan all the time when they don't put their foot down in any way, shape, or form, and I will give them a credit when they give this little modicum of pushback. Okay, it's not nearly enough. I wish they would just use their leverage and their numbers to just force this to, which is effectively what they're trying to do. But I wish they would be much more bold in how they go about these things. I wish they would force votes on things all the time. I mean, we've discussed this ad nauseum, right? But it's good to see that they're at least not completely capitulating to Pelosi like they have in the past on certain issues. And it's good to see that there are many of them who are not going to vote for this, and Bernie too in the Senate. So and since the Senate's 50-50, this is one thing that gets left out of the mainstream discussion entirely, and quite frankly, not mentioned enough in independent media. Bernie Sanders has just as much power as Joe Manchin. He can tank a bill just like Joe can. And this is what I hate about the framing of all of this shit, you guys. The mainstream press treats Joe Manchin like he's this reasonable, principled, moderate fella, right? And then they treat Bernie like he's this extreme, crazy radical. So how does that frame it when either of them go to say, like when Manchin says, I will tank this bill if you don't give me tax cuts for billionaires or whatever, or deregulation or some conservative corporatist horseshit, right? Whatever it might be. The press treats that like it's totally normal and he's just representing his conservative state and yada, yada, yada. If Bernie or the squad threaten to tank a bill or even imply that they might consider tanking a bill, the media just loses their ever-loving fucking minds. And oh, they want to get nothing done. They're gonna tank the whole thing, right? Yada, yada, yada. Yet what happens like every time this budget ceiling situation that we've been talking about comes up? What happens? The corporatists politicize it and use it as leverage for their shitty agenda. And how does the mainstream media cover that? So you see quite a contrast here in how this has been portrayed by the media. And the progressives are always demonized and need to know that they always will be and should have known that going in. That's why it's not like it's an excuse for their lack of action. It's just worth explaining those media dynamics, right? So again, I'm thrilled to see some form of pushback. The 1.75 is obviously grossly inadequate. The 3.5 was grossly inadequate, you guys. The 6 was grossly inadequate, you guys. We need 10 plus. And more importantly than even the top line number 10, I get that number from the civil engineers who basically said we would need to spend 10 immediately just to get our infrastructure up to par. That's not even really getting into a bunch of the climate stuff. That's not getting into the human infrastructure stuff, like education and childcare and healthcare, right? So like, if you want to do those things, it should be more than 10. That's just on the top line. 3.5 was a gross compromise to start with, right? So 1.75 is nowhere close to adequate. I'm glad that they're putting their feet down. And again, I'm sure end up criticizing them soon when they fold in a way that I find displeasing, but I will give them the credit right now for at least seeming to be willing to take up this fight. And Bernie too. Bernie's been very vocal about certain parts of this bill that he does not think should be cut, and he is apparently supportive of this bill being tanked. We should not pass it. Absolutely not. And obviously, and I know I've been over this before, but just in case anyone doesn't understand the dynamics here, the reconciliation bill is the only bill that has anything remotely good in it. Again, grossly inadequate. The infrastructure bill, the bipartisan bill, is just a piece of garbage, literally. It's just a handout to the wealthy. It's garbage. It's a terrible bill. So the reason progressives are willing to, they're pairing those bills together. They're saying, we will not give you your corporate handout unless you also do this, right? And of course, the Cinemas and the Manchins and the Republicans of the world want those bills decoupled, because then the moment that they pass the infrastructure bill, there's no more leverage for progressives to get the reconciliation bill done. And Manchin and Sinema can basically tell them to piss off. So for those that don't understand the dynamic, that is where we currently stand, is that there's a refusal right now to vote for the infrastructure bill in an attempt to demand that a better reconciliation bill and assurances from the corporatists that they will vote for that reconciliation bill. And one last thing that I really wanted to note on the media coverage of this stuff, you guys, do not call them centrists. Do not call them moderates. They are conservative corporatists. Okay. And oh shit, I meant to cue this clip up. Now realizing I forgot to. Mehdi Hassan absolutely drilled Joe Lieberman on this. And he put up polling, and he said, listen, it was, I don't know, 8 or 9 of the core pieces of the initial $3.5 trillion bill. And he showed the polling on them. Some of them were in the 80s, like 83, 84% approval, some in the 70s, some in the 60s, all of them like over 65% approval, which is a strong majority. So the point that Mehdi was making was, Joe, you can't call yourself a centrist while you oppose this incredibly popular agenda. This stuff is by definition down the center if 80% of the country wants it. You can't call something fringe if 80% of the country wants it. You can't treat that like it's an extreme policy. So how are you the centrist when you're rejecting what is clearly a moderate policy, something that the voters approve of, by definition moderate? And Joe had a terrible response. He tried to say centrism isn't an ideology, it's a strategy, and he deflected, just obfuscated away from the challenging question that he for once was presented on corporate media. So I wanted to make sure everybody kind of just rejects that general idea of calling these fucking people centrists or moderates. They're corporatists. That's what they are. And it's an extreme position to say, I oppose 84% of the country or 78% of the country or whatever. You're in the fringe on the right. You're extreme right. I don't care if you put a D next to your name on this policy belief. You're on the extreme right, and you're trying to tank an incredibly popular and moderate piece of legislation, right? So, and this all goes back to like the general framing of all this stuff, that a reconciliation bill like this would be framed as a lefty position is insane, along the same lines of what I was just talking about. It's moderate at best. It's like center right on the world stage, you guys. Like, the Democrats are a conservative party on the world stage. And actually, on that note, the Build Back Better bullshit that they keep, they clearly think it's effective. I don't understand how it's one of the worst phrases I've heard in my entire life. And but it was stolen by the Tories in the UK. It tells you all you need to know about where the Democrats actually sit on the political spectrum. Another connection there, after Hillary lost, a bunch of her top campaign aides went and worked for Theresa May, who was the conservative candidate in the UK. The Democrats and the Tories actually line up pretty nicely on a lot of issues. So that it just tells you how like extreme to the right our political framing is in this country. And this reconciliation coverage has been a very nice example of that. So I hope that they hold firm. I really do, as it pertains to this bill. So fingers crossed, but I'm not naive enough to expect it. Let's hope they stand firm and get whatever they possibly can get out of it. This is just to again detail what specifically we're talking about here. We're talking about childcare. We're talking about guaranteed paid leave for sick sick leave and parental leave. We're talking about tuition-free community college, things that would tangibly affect people's everyday lives. We're talking about expanding Medicare and Medicaid. We're talking about including vision and dental and more in Medicare. Like that concept alone, and I finally saw some mainstream coverage of this because I've been saying this forever. Why are teeth and eyes considered not part of your body? Like, did we separate? Are my eyes not part of my health? It's utterly insane. Whoever decided to separate dental and vision from healthcare was clearly a capitalist, like clearly an insurance executive or some shit. Because there's no sense there. There's no logic there at all. And of course, Democrats been promising these kinds of things forever. They've been running on the prescription the drug reform, like reforming. Let me step back. Totally word salad at that. They've been running on allowing Medicare to negotiate better drug prices for like 15 years. It's one of the most popular policies that they talk about during elections. And what's one of the first things they fucking pull out of this bill when Joe Manchin says he doesn't want to pay for it? I mean, it's so pathetic. It is so pathetic. If the Democrats weren't in such positions of power, I would legitimately pity them because they are so pathetic. I'm holding out some hope that we'll get some good things here, but I'm not naive enough to expect it. And this bill as it stands right now, just don't pass the infrastructure bill. There's no reason to. It's a piece of shit. So if it's basically between passing the infrastructure bill right now and or holding out with some chance of getting a better reconciliation bill, I don't even care if we get the better reconciliation bill. The choice is obvious right now, right? Tank the infrastructure bill, and then we can hope to get what the best we can out of the reconciliation situation. So we'll see if they hold firm. I want to show you guys here.